So I'm Maria Wiscombe. I work for the Utah Parent Center and I support families in Alpine School District. I have a daughter who has been through the special education program with the district, so I've lived through this process as well. I am a support to the parents. I'm a friend of the district, but they are very well aware of my role, which is to support parents. I'm not a legal advocate, so I don't have that legal training, that background, but I help families navigate the whole IEP system and that sort of thing. So you're always welcome to contact me, and my contact information is at the end of the presentation. I also have some handouts that I'll post on our Google site, and then I'll also in the chat box at the end put them in the chat so that you can access those. So tonight we're going to talk about transitions to middle school. So from elementary to middle school, and then middle school to high school. And that is our goal. And here's my contact information. I do get calls occasionally from someone who is in a charter school. And just so you know, charter schools are their own district. So even though they may lay within Alpine School District's boundaries, charters are their own districts. And we have parent consultants at our main office that work with families in charter schools. So most often, if it's a quick question, I'll handle it. And if not, I'll refer families to the main Utah Parent Center. All right, in this transition, who is worried the most? You? Your child? Sometimes I think as parents, we get a little more stressed about this transition than our kids may be. And so one of the things that we need to be aware of is how we're showing and expressing our stress, because that can heighten our kids' stress if we're stressed about it. And so one of the things that we can really strive to do is be as calm and positive as possible. And then in answering questions that your child might have, one of the best things is to follow their lead. And their questions and concerns maybe about, what's junior high going to be like and what to expect, and just be there to help support them, back them up. We're going to talk about some things to kind of help alleviate those fears and concerns that both we as parents and our kids might have. All right, so one of the things, well, it's never too early to get prepared for transition. Most of the things that we're going to talk about, well, will relate to both transitioning to middle school and transitioning to high school. But oftentimes the biggest transition is from elementary to middle school or junior high. And what we want to do is start early with our kids, make an appointment in the spring to possibly meet with the principal, the counselor, and possibly the teachers, depending on if you know who your child is going to be with. So there are different situations at the junior high, and I don't know everybody's situation, but I would imagine that we have quite a few parents on here whose kids will be in a life skills, a special class life skills, or in resource. And you typically will know in the spring who those your special education teachers are. And if you feel like it would be helpful for your student, you can make an appointment to meet them. But you can always set up a time to meet with the principal and the school counselor. School counselors can help with schedules and things like that. And so that can be a good start to help your student become familiar with a few people at the school level. Another thing would be to tour the new school. So take an opportunity to go. With COVID, we're kind of a little restricted with some of the activities that we might be able to go to, but if there's sporting events, if there are plays or concerts, that's a great opportunity to be able to go and at least look at part of the school. And then again, you can call the front office and set up a time to be able to come and just walk through the school. It might have to be after school hours, but that's a possibility as well. Just to help the student become familiar with the school. And then in August, typically the student will receive a handbook. It might happen at the back to school night, but a handbook to help them understand, the rules of the school, kind of the layout, what's expected at junior high or high school, that sort of thing. Become familiar with knowing how to access the school website, including Skyward. I know since COVID and teachers doing a lot more online, they use Canvas. And so just becoming familiar with some of those programs. And then also I've got, let's see. Yeah, I'm just looking a little bit at my notes. And then one thing you can do also is to prepare a fact sheet for each teacher. When a new student starts at a school, the IEP is handed over from the elementary to the junior high or from the junior high to the high school. Sometimes there will be a meeting between the current team and someone from the receiving team, but not necessarily, the whole team from the elementary and the whole team from the junior high. But that information will be passed over to the new folder holder, which again could be the resource teacher, could be the life skills teacher, depending on the services that your student has. And the IEP information, the goal information, should only be accessible by those who are providing services for the student. But the accommodation piece in the IEP, which if you think about the way the IEP is written, towards the end, there's a service and minutes page that talks about, they have reading and they have reading for 60 minutes a week and math for 60 minutes a week, or, however that is allocated. And then below that is a list of accommodations. That piece should be given to every teacher. And so those accommodations should be provided as appropriate in pretty much every class. But one thing that we at the Parent Center encourage parents to do is to prepare a fact sheet for each teacher to help them be aware of the accommodations that your student has. So you're helping the school out and the teachers out and your student out by presenting that information to the teacher prior to school starting. So if you think about it, the teachers have now at the junior high level, in elementary, they have 30 kids about, but in the junior high level, they have 4 classes twice or every day. And they have an A day schedule and a B day schedule. And so it can be quite overwhelming for a teacher to get on top of everything. And so a fact sheet can be super helpful. And I've got a sample right here, and I'll include the website on the end of this presentation, how you can access this. But this is just a template of what you can share with a teacher. It's also helpful to share the strengths of your student. Sometimes they might think, well, it's an IEP student, they have accommodations, and they probably struggle a lot, but you don't want them to get stuck there. You want them to understand your student, know their strengths, and get to know that there's a lot of positives that your student has to add to the class. And then this is just part of the template, but you can also go down and list the accommodations, which is kind of what is listed on here where it says Joe's challenges and way to address them. So that's kind of where you could list the accommodations and why they're effective. Something to remember too, I've been in a couple of meetings the last couple of weeks with parents that are in the secondary level working with their teams, and just a reminder to parents and teachers that accommodations are something that a student is entitled to, not something that a student earns. So just that reminder that if a teacher doesn't want to provide that accommodation, you'll want to talk to the folder holder and or the principal, and making sure that the teacher understands that that student is entitled to those accommodations and can use them when they need them. David, are there any questions in the chat box? I see that
There was just a comment, just reiterating just how nice it is when parents do bring information to teachers. There are a lot of kids, a lot of teachers, and so sharing something in this kind of concise way just helps to emphasize those things that will help your student be successful, and those things are always appreciated. There is a question here.
Okay.
If the school doesn't do anything about the teacher and that's not providing the accommodation.
What if the school doesn't do anything about the teacher that's not providing the accommodation?
Yes, that is the question.
Then you would, so if you've talked to the principal, we always talk to parents about the chain of communication. You want to resolve things at the lowest level possible. So you start with the teacher, and if it's not happening there, and if this is a general education teacher, you could also work with a special education teacher. So talk with the general education teacher, the special education teacher. If you're not getting any response there, then you would go to the principal or the vice principal. And you should know, you should be made aware of who is working with your student on the administrative level. At the junior high and high school, sometimes they have them divided up by the last name, the first letter of the last name. Sometimes they may have a principal that's over special education. I think the schools are getting big enough now, though, that it's more that the administrator who's over that section of the alphabet, you'll want to talk with them. And if you're still not getting anywhere, then you'll want to call the special ed department at the district office, and they can step in and provide the training that the teachers might need. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and Maria, there's just some concerns that are being raised when we're talking about number of kids that a teacher has. A gen ed classroom teacher will have that responsibility, getting 200 students perhaps at the start of the school year. The resource teachers and special class teachers do not have that many students. So a resource teacher typically will have around 40 students that they are working with directly, and special class teachers are still in that same range that you've been familiar with, of maybe 12 to 15 students. So this is talking about that general ed teacher, where if students are accessing those classes, those accommodations still need to be provided for them to be able to access the content in those classes. And those are some of the teachers maybe that it's just nice to bring other things to their attention, because they do have a large number of students that they are teaching. Is that clear to everybody? You are not going to be leaving elementary school and then your kids are lost in a sea of 200.
No,
That's not what we're saying.
Right. Sorry. Yes. Thanks for that clarification. No, there will be a handoff. You will most likely be meeting with especially the special class teachers, the small group teachers, but you can also meet with the resource teacher prior to school starting as well to help with that transition. So we're going to move on. I need to go back actually. So I don't have a tab for this, but something to think about as well is coming up with some sort of a calendar or tracking system to help your students. So this might be more appropriate for students who are in resource or in general education, if not all the time, the majority of the time, to help keep them on task, on target. We'll go over a few more ideas as we continue to go through the slides. But one thing to think about too is practice makes perfect. So it can be overwhelming going from elementary school where you have a homeroom class and then you go out for specialties. but there's, you've got that home base the majority of the time, and then you may go out for a couple of hours for specialties. Where in junior high, you have a different teacher for every class period. And it can be a little crazy. We know our junior highs are super huge. There are a lot of students. There are a lot of students in our high schools. And so being able to access that class schedule as soon as possible and taking advantage of being able to go over to the school and walk through the school and helping your student become familiar with the layout of the school, familiar with where their classes are. Some suggestions I've received from the district and other teachers are to get a school map and mark it up, and even walk through a couple of times and figure out what's going to be the best way to get to certain classes, and maybe time it. There are accommodations that can be put in place to help a student who may deal with a lot of anxiety when they are in the hallway with a lot of other students and just can't make their way through the hallway because it's just too overwhelming. And that accommodation could be that the student could leave a minute early to beat the rush, or be a minute or two late when they get to the other class, just because of the overwhelmingness of getting from one class to another. But practice, go to the school, practice, help them become familiar. I am thinking that the schools still do this with 7th graders, where they come a day early, where there's only 7th graders in the school, so that they can practice that day as well and get to all their classes, see where they're at, and be able to navigate the schools. Also, something to think about too is lockers. So if your student has a hard time being able to open a locker that requires, the spinning and the 3 different numbers, an accommodation could be that they could have like a padlock with a key, so that they just have to keep track of the key and they don't have to remember the combination to the locker. Another accommodation could be that they just use their backpacks. And I know that quite a few students use their backpacks anyway. So that could be something that could be looked at as well if a student has a hard time navigating a combination locker. And then another thing too also would be, so in junior high and high school, we're looking at A days and B days. And to help a student stay a little more on track, they could possibly have an A-day backpack and a B-day backpack, or at least an A-day folder, binder folder, and a B-day binder folder, so that they can keep those things separate and know what to take on the appropriate day. All right, in the beginning of school, or beginning of semester, the teachers will hand out a disclosure document, which talks about a lot of important key things to know about their class. So one of the things hopefully is listed as the best way to communicate with teachers, the best way for parents to communicate with the teacher, and the best way for students to communicate with the teacher. And that's super important because you'll want to know what the best way is. So like if you need to get a message to them quickly, knowing that is a text the best way, is an email the best way, then also knowing, talking with the teacher and saying, if I were to email you, how much time do I need to give you till I can expect a reply? Because sometimes, often the teachers have a prep period during the day, but they may not actually have time to look at their emails till the end of the day. And so, they may say, you're going to have to wait till the end of the school day for me to be able to respond. But then the same thing is, if they need to communicate with you, you need to let them know the best way for them to get in touch with you. And then also, what would be a timely response for you to get back to them. So those are a couple of things to keep in in the back of your mind as you look through the disclosure document. Also, they often contain a schedule of major projects. And so that's important to work with your student on getting those scheduled in a calendar. If your student needs to be able to break down those major projects and start working on them earlier than the typical student, you should be able to do that as you work with the teacher. And then you'll want to keep it throughout the semester because it's going to have important information throughout the semester or throughout the year. So yeah, so depending on if it's a year-long class or a semester-long class, you're just going to want to keep that disclosure document. And then write down questions as you go through the document so that you can keep track of what you need to ask the teacher and have the teacher clarify. I know a lot of teachers are super good with breaking down those projects, or even when book reports are due, and being able to break those down into smaller steps for students that need that help in being organized and staying on top of the tasks. So communication is key to eliminating or not even having any problems, just keep them at bay. But being able to have open communication with the teacher can resolve so many things, and not making assumptions on either side can be so helpful as well. So let's see. Oh, you know what? Sorry. Hopefully I'm not making you dizzy. Okay. A successful student. Practicing time management skills can be super helpful. Knowing how, making a time for homework, making a place for them to do homework. I know a couple of my kids in junior high, when they got home from school, they needed a break. And so they just needed to be able to go outside, just do something physical, and just have a mental and physical break from school before they could turn to their homework. Or another child would just come home and dive right into their homework and get it done because they wanted to just get it done out of the way and be done for the day. So knowing what works best for your student and really listening to them, because sometimes us as parents want them to get their homework done, but then it becomes a fight when what the student really needs is to be able to have a break before they can refocus and dive into their homework. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing too is they need to learn how to be a self-advocate. And I've got some links at the end of the presentation on that as well. But our students need to start learning how to advocate for themselves, especially with their accommodations, as they, like we talked about earlier, have access to those accommodations in pretty much all of their classes as appropriate, like we said. But sometimes teachers need to have a reminder that, hey, I have an accommodation to be able to take my test in the library, in the media center. And so when a test comes up, the student needs to be able to have those skills and the confidence to ask that teacher and remind them, hey, I'm going to take my test to the media center. There can be methods of helping that student learn how to advocate. So, some students might be embarrassed because they have to ask. And so there's things that you can work on, ways to communicate that with teachers. You'll just want to work with even teacher to teacher on what works best, and especially get your students buy-in on what they would feel comfortable doing. And sometimes we forget to get our kids involved, especially in their IEP meetings. But especially by the time they're 14, they legally should be a member of the IEP team. But it's important to involve them earlier too, to help them become aware of what services they have, the teachers that they have access to, the resources they have access to at the school, what their accommodations are, and have input on what they feel is important, because oftentimes it's super easy for us to assume what we know or what we feel is important to them, or what we feel like they know is important to them. But we really do need to involve them in making some of those decisions as much as possible, because I think then they're going to have more of a buy-in and become more involved. And they need those skills, those self-advocacy skills through high school. And then if they go on to college, technical school, or even in different job settings, they still can have access to some of those accommodations if they know that's what they need. So it's so important to have our kids involved as much as possible in their IEP meetings. And then having them have a person that they are super comfortable to go to at the school if they are having a struggle of some sort. That could be a teacher, that could be the school counselor. I think there's guidance counselors in a lot of the schools, or student advocates. But helping them and communicating again with the IEP team, and helping them find someone that they're comfortable with being able to talk with at any point at the school can be super helpful too. And then also, so we talked a little bit about, having an A-day binder and a B-day binder. That can make or break a student as well. And then also finding out if the school has any special help. So I know a lot of schools have like a flex time where the students can access any of the teachers that they might that might be struggling in their class. I'm kind of out of the loop on some of that because it's more general ed specific, but just, make sure that you understand what resources the school has. A lot of times the schools have an after-school math lab or an after-school writing lab, and just know what they have so that you can take advantage of those resources as well. And then we already talked a little bit about setting a study schedule of, being flexible with your student and their needs. And then having a place in your home that would be a comfortable setting for them to do their homework. I listen sometimes to some ADHD podcasts or webinars, and there's so many, our students need so many different things. When I'm working or preparing like this workshop, it helps me to focus if I have music on. And it doesn't have to be classical music. It can be music with words or whatever, but I just need that on in the background and I can focus better. Some students just need movement in order to focus. So, a quiet, calm place with no distractions may not necessarily be the best setting. It may be, but it may not be. So really listening to your student and what they need as far as supports go. All right, I need to take a drink, 1 sec. Okay, so one big jump from elementary to junior high is peer pressure and social concerns. And so some of the things that we need to think about is age appropriate dress. And schools have their guidelines as far as I'm going blank. What might be on the shirt, graphics on the shirts, holes in the pants, length of shorts and skirts and shirts and all sorts of things. But they seem to be changing from time to time, but being aware of what the school standards are, as well as helping them dress age appropriately. And it seems like the norm now is pretty much anything goes, right? So it doesn't seem to be as concerning as maybe a few years ago, but that's something to keep in mind. One of the biggest things that I talk to parents about in this area is grooming and hygiene. And In elementary, I mean, their kids are starting to go through puberty. Some have hit it pretty good by the time of sixth grade. Some might just be slowly getting there. But really working with your student on hygiene, showering and wearing deodorant. Those are probably top two, washing their hair, things like that. But working with that can help a student fit in a little more socially appropriate with their peers. Some of our students, especially maybe more so in the life skills setting, may struggle with understanding the difference with relationships, friendships versus romantic. And I've got a link on here, and then it's also available on my website, but that talks about, walking your kids through different scenarios and helping them understand different situations. I've got a great example here. So I have a friend whose son was in a life skills class in high school, and he was kind of low verbal. He had some words, but he was super social and loved being around his peers, and would be super excited to see them in the hall, and would touch them. And it kind of started making the girls a little nervous, because when he touched them, he just touched them on the side. And I mean, to him, he was just touching them to get their attention. But to them, it was, becoming a little too personal and making the girls, again, quite uncomfortable. So I think this is awesome, because the mom got a group of those friends together and just said, hey, you know that my son loves to be around you guys, and you guys are always super good with him. What would be the most appropriate way for him to come say hi and to get your attention? And they talked for a little bit, and they came up with the idea of him just, putting his hand on their shoulder to stop and say hi. And so they worked with him on that. And then that became his new habit, is to touch on the shoulder. And I just think that's awesome that the mom involved the peers, because they came up with something that was socially appropriate for his age. So just something to think about. I think friends and peers can be some of your greatest resources when you're trying to make sure that your student is being age appropriate, socially appropriate, and also protected, and that they're being protected as well. And then there are a lot of extracurricular activities in junior high and even more in high school. So looking at ways that they can be involved in those activities can be a game changer for the students, whether they might need a friend to go with them or a parent to go with them to be supportive and to help them be involved. Also, sometimes the extracurricular activities, especially like the clubs, can be a great social setting, a social skills setting for students. If they're doing something that they really enjoy doing alongside a peer that's doing, similar stuff, similar activity, that's going to give them the opportunity to talk. And they might be talking about what they're doing and not interacting in a more peer conversation, but they're interacting because they're talking about what they're doing. I think that's a really great suggestion in helping some of our students build on their social skills, is taking advantage of the programs, the activities and clubs that are available at the secondary level. So do we have any questions, David, up to this point?
No, we're doing well.
We're doing good. All right. Okay, and then as a parent, we want to continue to be proactive with our students, but we also want to be able to help them build skills themselves. And so it's kind of hard to sometimes step back and let our students practice different things, but it's going to benefit our students if we let them do that. And it is hard to see sometimes see them fail or struggle in different situations. but we can also help them gain from that experience as well. So you can practice different settings at home, and then maybe in small groups if they really need that support. Those things can also be built into their IEP if they have those services built in. So in the life skills setting, they can practice all sorts of different social skills. And I know that the life skills classes do focus on social skills, like have an actual period for that sort of discussion. And this reminds me too, so I was in a meeting once at a junior high for a student that was in resource. So he didn't need the support of a life skills class. He was in resource for math and reading, and then in gen ed for his other classes, but he really struggled with social skills and social appropriateness. And they had, I thought it was a brilliant idea. He was a peer tutor, and the gen ed representative at his IEP was the life skills teacher, because he was accessing that class as a gen ed student. But the life skills teacher suggested that maybe he be a peer tutor in her class while they were doing the discussion on social skills training. And I thought that was awesome, because then he could take advantage of that training and practice with the life skills students, but also learn those skills himself. So, you can be creative with your teams and try and, figure out how to target some of these difficult things with your kids. Another thing to think about is to be available to listen without giving advice. And that is so hard as a parent. I know I struggle with it. And one thing I found was so important for my son as he was going through secondary school was just to be available. So if he came home and needed to talk, I just needed to be available, whether I was in the kitchen making dinner or whatever. I could do it while I was listening, but he needed to know that he had my attention. And it didn't have to be a half an hour or an hour. It could be 5 or 10 minutes even, but to just listen and listen, and not feel like I had to solve anything, give him advice, but just be there to listen. And again, I know that's hard as a parent to just listen. And then again, we talked about this already, find out school resources, know what's available, and access those programs. One thing also to keep in mind is being aware of the signs of bullying. And I honestly haven't heard a whole lot from parents about struggling with this, but I know that it's out there because we hear about it in the news and different situations. But just be in tune with your student and look for different signs of the possibility of them maybe being bullied. And it could, if they're all of a sudden super quiet, or if they don't want to eat or want to go straight to their room and spend time there and not around the family, just be aware of those signs and what, those signs could possibly mean. Also, our students who may have severe intellectual disabilities, which my daughter has, they deal a lot with anxiety and depression, different mental health issues that we may not really think of them dealing with, but they can, and they do. And so, being aware of those signs as well and seeking out resources to help with them. And one of the things that we do at the Parent Center is help families connect to community resources. So if you're ever in a situation that you need added supports, don't hesitate to reach out. All right. And then again, be involved at any level. I'm not sure where schools are at with COVID and letting parents become more involved again in the schools. But in the past, I've had friends that, would go over at lunch and help with lunch, or different activities that are going on during the day at school as well as after school. PTA, there's a lot of different ways that we can be involved, but even just, with their friends, supporting them at home, helping them invite friends over, and becoming comfortable with those situations. Just what we can to help them be involved by us being involved. And then again, attending school events with them, or chaperoning at a distance so they can be there. And then using positive forms of communication. At a meeting I was at earlier this week, the team was actually super awesome about this. The gen ed teacher that was in the meeting was talking with a student. The student was there as well. And the gen ed teacher just wanted to support the student and just say, hey, when your parents compliment you, soak that in. And if they're being too hard on you, don't be afraid to say, hey, I need, give me a break. I'm a little stressed or whatever. But then he turned to the parents, the teacher did, and just said, it's so important for us to continue to be positive with our kids, not always on top of them. Why aren't you getting good grades? Why aren't you getting this done? Why aren't you turning in your homework? But, looking for ways to be positive with them and encouraging with them. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, Maria, there is just a question. We have had a few people join a little bit later, but where can we access the recording of this meeting after the meeting?
Okay, it's not going to be posted for a couple of weeks, but I will post the website that I'll have it, that I'll share it on. So I'll put that in the chat box at the end. And since this is being recorded, also tell parents to go to the Alpine School District Special Education website. And on the top of that special education page, there's a box that says Parent Resources. If you click on that, you will see another tab for Parent Night information. And that's where all the handouts and recordings and information is posted for all of our parent nights. So, but I will put that link in the chat box at the end. Anything else?
That's it so far.
Okay, awesome. Okay, another thing to think about too is the parent-teacher relationship. And I've worked with parents who have a great relationship with their teacher, and I've worked with parents who feel a lot of tension between them and the teacher. And sometimes that's hard to overcome, but it can be overcome. And one of the things that I encourage parents to do is find something to validate a teacher about. So if you think about, if your kids ask you to do something, I tell my kids, if you want to do something and you need to ask me for permission, your best bet for me to say yes is to butter me up, but not by compliments. I want them to make their bed, or, what can I do to help you out, mom? And things like that. And then, once they do that, their chances of me saying yes are have increased greatly. And I think we all know that, a little bit of validation can go a long way. And so if you have some tension with a teacher, if you can just find something that they're doing well and can just, express a little bit of gratitude for that, that can melt away a lot of things. When I first started out, I've been doing this for a little more than 10 years. And when I first started out, a parent called me and said that he knew he had burned some bridges and he was a little embarrassed by it. And he was trying to figure out what he could do to kind of mend those bridges and move on. And I was talking to the special ed director at that time about it. And she said, the best thing you could do is just go to the meeting and say, I'm sorry, I know I've burned some bridges. Can we just move on from here? And I thought, it can be as simple as that, but we've got to swallow our pride. But sometimes it can be just as simple as that. I've also been in other meetings where there has been tension prior to the, in previous meetings, and the parents are nervous about it. And I'll just suggest to bring a treat to your IEP team meeting. And it's amazing what a treat can do as well. So, just be thinking about, teachers do have a lot on their plates. Parents have a lot on their plates as well. And we've got to be understanding of different situations and be respectful of different situations. And so, just kind of keep those things in mind. Be respectful of the teacher's time. So it's hard for a teacher, especially at parent-teacher conference, to give you a progress report, because that's not the purpose of a parent-teacher conference. Parent-teacher conference is more of a check-in type thing. And so be respectful of what the meeting is for. Be respectful of their time. If you need to communicate quite a bit with a teacher and feel like you're needing to send lengthy emails, it might be time to just schedule a meeting. And know that you can schedule an IEP meeting at any time. You can request to schedule a meeting. You don't have to wait till the annual review. So if it's important that you have a meeting and meet with the team, then request to have an IEP meeting where you can discuss all these things that are of great concern to you. And my daughter with special needs just walked into my room. So if you hear a little background, that's why. And then know the best way to communicate with teachers. We've talked about this already. And for the best way for them to contact you, attend parent-teacher conferences. And I hear from teachers that they love it when parents come. They love to have that discussion and to be able to talk with them, make that connection, and hopefully highlight some things that they haven't been able to highlight in any other way. And then the last thing too is to come prepared for IEP meetings or 504 meetings, whatever you have with the team, but come prepared. Typically, the goal is to have the teachers communicating with the parents prior to an IEP meeting so that you are both working on a draft. Sometimes us as parents may not have suggestions for goals, and so we might want the teacher to start. But if you can let the teacher know that, what, I want to see what you have in mind for goals and send me what you're thinking, and then I can kind of think through that and maybe give you some suggestions back. That can be so helpful. It can help IEP meetings go way more smoothly. And then you feel involved, that you have, that this isn't just being decided by the school. And then on that same note, like we talked about earlier, is involving your student as well. So, have them be involved with creating that draft IEP too, help getting their input on what goals they feel like they need, as well as accommodations that they will use. So yeah, that can be so helpful. And I've been to some IEP meetings that are super long because that communication didn't happen. And I've been to IEP meetings that have gone super smooth, and it's because they've communicated and they've worked together to develop that IEP. And if you don't receive a draft, teachers are overwhelmed. And again, parents were overwhelmed too. But if an IEP meeting is coming up in the next week or so, don't be afraid to reach out to the teacher and get that dialogue going, because it can come from both of us. It doesn't have to just come from the teacher. All right, and then I wanted to talk just briefly about a little bit about graduation, because we're looking at, with secondary school, and especially once the 9th grade starts, we're looking at all the credits that start counting towards graduation, what that means. I will be doing in March, our parent night in March will be on transition. So transitioning from school to adult life. And we'll talk about this information in a lot more detail. So I want to just go over this briefly, but if you have specific questions that are going to take some time, look for that email for the meeting in March, or you're welcome to call me and I can talk with you about resources and different things. But know that when your student takes the ACT, that the accommodations that they receive in school, the ones that are appropriate will be applied to the ACT. So extended time can be an accommodation on the ACT. They can't use a calculator, I don't believe, on the ACT, but there are different accommodations that can be accessed, and you'll work with the school counselor on that. Well, actually, no, I think it's the resource teacher, the special education teacher that will work with the student and then send those into ACT to make sure that the student is provided those accommodations. But it's always good as a parent to follow up with that and make sure that that's happening. So just know that those accommodations can be accessed on the ACT test. And then something to start thinking about before ninth grade even is your student diploma bound, or are they more geared towards getting a certificate of completion? And a diploma can look like a high school diploma, which I'm not sure what the credits are in the district, but I think it's 28. There's a district diploma, which is I think a 24 credit diploma. So they would still receive it at their high school graduation, but it would say Alpine School District on it and not American Fork High or Mountain View High. So those would, if a student gets a diploma, a high school or district diploma, that would end FAPE. That would end their access to services through the public school. And yeah, so that just ends their services there. But if they are geared towards certificate of completion, then they would not receive either of those diplomas. They could still walk with their class and receive something, but I mean, nobody receives the actual diploma at graduation anyway. They get a book or, you know, the holder, but the diploma is not inside. But a student, excuse me, a student that's on more a certificate of completion track can receive what's called an alternate diploma. And I'm not going to share much information on that, but it's one that's specific to students who are more of a life skills student, and it doesn't have the same bearing as a high school diploma, but that is an option. And then a GED. So any student can access GED. So those are options as far as diploma or certificate of completion. You want to start thinking about what is the best track for your student. It doesn't need to be decided in 7th, 8th, or 9th grade. It can be decided at some point. But if your student is diploma bound and has the credits to receive a diploma, but at the last minute, you're like, oh no, I think I want them to go on to post high. If they have the credits, the school cannot hold those back so that he can access post high. So you need to have that communication with your team on, you know, an ongoing communication on what's going to be the best track for your student. So post high, the program in Alpine School District is called ATEC, and there's an ATEC East, which is in his own building in American Fork. There's an ATEC West, which is connected to Horizon School in Saratoga. And there's a post-high program at Dan Peterson School, which is a special school too. So there are different post-high programs. The post-high programs focus on job skills and independent living skills. And a student can go there 1 year, or they can go through the year that they turn 22 and access those services. They do a lot of job training, and as is appropriate for the student. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind. And then we talked briefly about higher education. Well, I guess I didn't cover this, but in college and technical schools, accommodations can be provided. So, you know, services through under the special education services and when they leave school, whether diploma or certificate of completion, but their accommodations can still follow them. So as appropriate. So college can provide a note taker for students that need that accommodation. And I encourage parents and students to contact the colleges that they're looking at. Every college has an accessibility or disability resource center. They might call different things, but they all have the same, accessibility or disability resource center. You would contact them to see what accommodations they accept and then work towards those. So, I mean, and when I say work towards those, what accommodations do they have? Do we need to help our students become more independent in areas that accommodations that aren't going to be implemented at the college level? Because colleges still need to have that rigor. A student in college needs to have the same level of rigor that every other student in college has, but they can have accommodations. So I've seen the number in the chat increase. And so
Yeah.
what
So
questions do we have?
we've got a few questions, Maria. One is in regards to an IEP meeting for middle school, who is involved in those meetings?
Okay, so thanks for that question. That's really good. So there's 4 key people, mandatory people that have to be in that IEP. The LEA, who is the administrator, the parents, the special education teacher, and the general education teacher. And if one of those 4 key people are missing at any point, you have the right as a parent to say, okay, we need to stop because I understand that we need to have an administrator in here the whole time, or that we need to have a general education teacher in here the whole time. So those 4 are key members. I have been in IEP meetings at the secondary level where a district director has been there as well. And the general education teacher had to step out because they had to get back to their class. And the special ed director has stopped the meeting and said, okay, well, we need to wait until you can get another general education teacher in here. So those are 4 mandatory team members. Once the student turns 14, I mean, at any point you can have the student involved, but once a student turns 14, they need to be involved at some level in the IEP. So they don't necessarily need to be at the IEP meeting, but they can be for sure. They can be at the meeting for a little bit. They can help the teacher prepare for the meeting. They can help the parent prepare for the meeting, whatever you feel would be most appropriate, but the student should be involved in the IEP. And then the rest is, related services, related service providers is appropriate. And then if there's been any evaluations done, someone that can explain the evaluation. So school psychologist or special education teacher. But those are the members, but remember the key ones are the LEA, the administrator, the parents, the special education teacher, and the general education teacher. So hopefully that helps. And if that hasn't happened, you need to bring that up to your IEP team, especially your principal. And if they ask you, so if this is an IEP meeting, so it can be an amendment, and I don't know if everybody needs to be there on an amendment, right, David?
Right, on an amendment, not everybody has to be.
Yeah, but if it's an actual IEP meeting and they say, are you okay with if the general education teacher leaves to get back to class? You can say no. You can say, well, if they need to leave, then we probably need to stop and reconvene this when we can have everybody together again. So just know that that you don't need to say okay, because honestly, if one of those 4 people are missing, then it becomes a meeting and no longer an IEP meeting. And I'm saying that confidently with David Turner, who is on here and is one of the special ed directors. So
right.
yay. Anyway.
There's another question, Maria, about maybe giving some examples of what accommodations might look like different in an elementary school versus a middle school? So what accommodations might be added or might be different from what they're experiencing in an elementary?
Okay, let me think this for a minute. So one would be kind of like we talked about, as far as like if a student needs to leave early to get through the hall, that can be an accommodation. A note taker. So if a student can listen to the lecture, what's going on in the classroom, but as soon as they start writing down, they're missing a chunk of the lecture because they have to concentrate on what they're writing, because they might write slow or whatever. They can have the accommodation to help with note taking. So it could be that the teacher provides a copy of the notes, or the student can get a copy of another student's notes, or the teacher can provide kind of like a worksheet where the notes, the basic notes are on there, but there might be a word missing here or there, so that students following along can fill in the blanks, so that they know that the student is listening and is taking notes. There's a lot more assistive technology type things that can help with note taking, but so that can be one. If a student might need a little extra support in a class, well, I might be talking out of order on this one. So typically, like for life skills students that are going to general education classes, they have a peer tutor go with them. I have seen on rare occasions a student that just needs added support. They don't need the level of life skills, but the team might work together. If the life skills class has plenty of peer tutors, they may have a peer tutor meet a student at a class just to add a little extra support. But that one, it just depends on how much support the student needs. I would have to like think of a situation and then be able to tell you an example of an accommodation. So if you can, if you are thinking of anything specific, maybe put that in the chat, and then David and I can address it.
Yeah. Another question is, as a parent might be considering the opportunity maybe to go part days or only on A day or B day to accommodate some other outside therapies and things that the student is involved in. Maria, have you heard of students doing that, and any tips on getting a schedule that would work for a student like that?
Yeah, so that's perfect, because I actually just thought of something similar to that. But so you could, and David, you can totally answer
Yeah.
this. I'll do my best, and then you fill in the blanks. So he's being very polite because he can totally answer these. And he's the authority and I'm not. But I've seen where students may go A days or B days. But the option would be to homeschool him, do the homeschool exemption, so that you can have the student out on the other days, and then you can do, ABA therapy or tutoring or whatever it is that you're feeling like you need to focus on, or half days. I've been in meetings where students are building up their days, so they might struggle being at school the whole day, but they can do first and second period. And so the team will step back and they'll start and do a shortened day schedule. So you're not homeschooling, but you're doing a shortened day schedule, and then building it up as a student can be successful. And when something like that occurs, they're also looking at what classes is the student most successful in. And let's start with those successful classes first, and then build his schedule from there. I've also seen, so as we're talking about schedules, and just kind of go off on a little bit of a tangent here. If you know how your student works best, so some students, they might want to just take all their hard classes on A days, and then B days just have all the fun electives. And you can work the schedules to as close to that as you can. Some students can concentrate better in the morning, so they might put their harder classes in the morning, or some, take a while to wake up, and so they might put their harder classes in the afternoon. And that's something that you'll want to work with your school counselor on. And if you need to pull in the resource teacher or the life skills teacher, whoever that the special ed teacher that you're working with to help you with that, you can. But that's an accommodation. That's something that you can request. But on the holding a student out half days or every other day, David, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think all those things that Maria's talked about are they're great. We have a lot of flexibility, honestly, with special education. My advice would just be that you take those concerns and questions just to your building administrator, your IEP team, and that you're just really open with what might be concerning to you or what you are feeling like would be of benefit, given maybe outside things that you're looking to do or what you want to be able to access from the school, which just opens the door for a larger conversation about how maybe some of the resources you might not be aware of that could meet some of those needs at school. But we do a lot of what's called dual enrollment. So it would be, some things would be maybe more under the direction of you as a parent and kind of in a homeschool kind of thing. We also work with families when they need to do anything to address any kind of therapy outside. If that's a consistent time, maybe every period, or a certain period in a schedule, we can work a lot of things out. So just being open and upfront and just communicating both concerns and what you're hoping will be the eventual outcome for your students. A lot of times it is thinking through, okay, we're not just living day by day, but really looking down the road too. And this is kind of our hope and where we see our student in a year or in 2 years or in 5 years. And then you can work with school teams to really tailor those things to get to those outcomes that you're desiring. So maybe some of that information is helpful too.
Yeah. Let me finish up with the slides and then I can close my PowerPoint and we can answer more questions. All right.
Okay.
If that's okay. Okay. So we've gone through a lot of details, a lot of things that we can focus on as parents and help our students be more successful at school, as well as, working with teachers, working with the teams. But we want to also focus on celebrating the successes. And sometimes we feel like they don't happen very often with some of our students, but even looking for the small things. And, I work with a lot of families who have a hard time getting their kids to school because of anxiety or, different issues that they just, it's so hard to get them to school. So, getting them through the front door, that's a huge success. You don't want to overkill to where, that's so embarrassing. I know. And then they don't want to go. But I mean, you want to just celebrate the successes, how little, how big, and just know that, help your student know that what they're doing is important and everything matters. Because when we're in IEP meetings, I mean, it's sometimes as a parent, it can be discouraging because we're talking about what they're struggling with. That's our focus because we're looking at IEP goals. How can we help them improve? We're looking at accommodations because they need more support. And sometimes that can become overwhelming and discouraging, but we want to focus at times still on the successes and what they're doing right. And then you'll have access to this PowerPoint on the Google site. And like I said, I'll add those into the chat box as soon as I stop sharing my screen. So you'll have access to these links that we've talked about. And then here's our contact information. I'll add my contact information into the chat box as well for those that joined a little later. But yeah, we will go to questions. And actually, before we turn on everybody's cameras, I'm going to launch a poll. So we're funded by grants and they ask us, your feedback on our trainings is super important. So if you wouldn't mind taking just a quick second to answer 7 questions on here about our presentation tonight, that would be super helpful. So with that, let's let's see. Go to the chat box.
So there's two questions that are in the chat box still, and then maybe there's others that will populate in just as we go through these. But one is the difference between resource and life skills. This question comes from a parent whose student is currently going to resource in elementary school. Now, how does that work in junior high? Is it one of the classes that he'll attend daily as part of his schedule?
Okay, so life skills classes are more geared towards those with intellectual disabilities that need more support than resource. And so probably not. So they build a schedule according to what the student needs, what level of supports. And so yeah, so the life skills is a small group, special class geared towards students that need a higher level of support than students that are in resource and general education. Does that answer your question?
And maybe even in addition to that too, with some of our students in resource and elementary, they may move into supports where there may be a need met in a resource class, be that a reading class or a writing class or a math class, or it may be that they're in a co-taught class. So a lot of our schools do work with the junior highs and with the parents too, as they work to kind of build their schedules and suggest some opportunities that might be available for them. So it could be, but each of those would just be a class period. So whatever their English class would be, or their math class would be, or that would be what would then be their schedule for, say, A1 or B3 or whatever that might be. So that's typically what a resource student can expect, is one of those things. It could be a resource setting where it might be a smaller class size to meet those needs academically, or it could be a co-taught class where there's a special education teacher and a general education teacher that share the responsibility of instruction within that classroom. So anyway, your current IEP team will kind of help suggest some things that would be appropriate for your student for junior high. And then as a member of the IEP team, always as a parent, you have that important and viable role to give input and feedback and ask questions and to help develop those supports.
Well, and I love that, because that was something I forgot to talk about. And that's the beauty of junior high, because in elementary, they're pulled out for resource.
Right.
Where in junior high, it's their class.
Yeah.
And so that's so nice. All right, I'll leave the poll up for just another 45 seconds. So if you haven't had a chance to fill it out and want to real quick, please do so. But I did add the link to the Google site, the straight link to the parent resource page, or the parent night resource page. But from there, you can go back and look at all the other resources that are on there. There's a ton focused on transitioning to adult life, a lot of the services that are available that families can access. So yeah, so check that out.
In your experience in working with parents in our district, what would you say about if you see an issue with the schedule prior to the start of school? Can that schedule be adjusted, and who do you reach out to do that?
You're going to want to, I would suggest, work with the school counselor and the special education teacher. I think it's important to get a relationship going with the school counselor. School counselor is not a member of the IEP team. They can be invited to the IEP, which is great, but they're not an official member of the IEP team. It's nice to have them there, especially when you're looking at schedules and trying to figure things out. But that's not even the purpose of the IEP. But if the team agrees that that would be a good thing to discuss at the meeting, you can definitely have them invited. But I would have that conversation, I think, David, with the school counselor and the special ed teacher.
Yeah, I think so. And there are a lot of schools in our district that really do have some great processes set up to really make that transition smooth in building schedules, so that you have plenty of time to really be able to see what that's going to look like. So working with your current IEP team at elementary, asking them, because they've also transitioned students to those schools. So they'll have a lot of information about things specifically, and then reaching out to that junior high administration just to kind of establish timelines and when can I ask this kind of question and when would it be good for me to start looking at whatever might be concerning or a question for you, and they'll be happy to work with you on that. There was a question too about when we're looking at specific accommodations on IEPs, is it best to set those in preparation for going to junior high, or is it better to transition and then request an amendment to the IEP to then address accommodations after you've transitioned?
It depends. No, that's a common answer to questions in special education. It depends. I've heard teams at the junior high be a little bothered sometimes because the elementary tries to gear the accommodations to junior high, not really understanding what everything that goes on at the junior high level. But then again, you want to set the student up for success. And so I'd still probably work with your team to get it geared to junior high as much as possible. But then don't be afraid to ask for even an amendment, an overview, give the new school a good 30 days to work with your student, get to know your student, and then make changes. But I mean, if you have those accommodations, whatever accommodations you have in place, and you start junior high, and if anything gets thrown off, I mean, I would be talking to the special ed teacher and the LEA as soon as possible, because you want to be able to help your student be as successful as possible, and you don't want things to fall apart completely. Sometimes things fall apart because it's just overwhelming, and everybody's got to step back and take a different look and put different things in place. But that's the rare case. But yeah, that's where communication goes. So, getting accommodations in place, setting up an appointment with the principal, the administrator that's going to be over your student when they are at the junior high, maybe reviewing some of those accommodations with them to just see what they think, if they're appropriate. I think that's totally appropriate to do. It wouldn't be a formal meeting, but at least they'd be aware of it, and then they'd go, hey, we could probably meet with the team and tweak those, as soon as possible. Knowing that during the summer, teachers are off contract pretty much almost as soon as school is out. They might be on contract a day or so, and then they're not back on contract until about 3 days before school starts. So, to get teacher access during the summer can sometimes be hard, but I've seen principals do it in cases where they really, really do need to have some support. But yeah, just communicating with that administrator, I think helping them be aware. And if you know who the resource teacher is going to be or the life skills teacher is going to be, you could have, like we talked about, meeting them in the spring, and then maybe let them know, hey, I want to bring a copy of his accommodations over. Do you have a minute that we could take a look at that to make sure that we're on the right page with transferring him to junior high? All right, any other questions? Anything we missed? Well, if not, we really appreciate you being on tonight. We had a great turnout.